Hello, and welcome to another episode of Before Coffee. And this time, Raj is already awake as soon as I logged on, so we don't have to wake anyone up. But we do have to look up some news.
Right. Yeah, my camera. My camera's new. New camera.
Nice.
A little too bright here.
Good morning and new camera.
Hair.
My hair is a mess. I haven't even done anything with it, so.
I got this brain thing going on.
Alright, brains activated.
It's not working.
I feel like this is going to be either a really long episode or a really short episode. Well, when you're ready to start, I'll be ready to start.
It's, Neil deGrasse Tyson says we're going to be in the Goldilocks zone. Everything's just right because Earth is in the Goldilocks. Right? Okay. Yeah, everything's just right. We're tilted just right. We're just right. This is from the sun, right? Go ahead. Again, I screwed up anyway.
All right, good morning and good afternoon to another Before Coffee. Today, in the Netherlands, children ombudsman and UN reporters ask to stop cutting off water to families.
Biden semiconductor plan flexes the power of the federal government.
Commercial corona test companies made millions. What are they doing with that money now?
I don't think they're playing it on the horse race. Winds shred southern plains. California said to get more snow.
And treating migrant workers badly will become a criminal offense in a new law.
And Jeff Bezos remains in running to buy the Washington Commanders. That and more on this week's edition or today's edition, February 28th edition of Before Coffee.
All right, good afternoon and good morning to everyone out there. In our first news story of the day, households with children should no longer be cut off for water, is what's called by the Ombudsman for Children and the UN Special Reporter on Water and Hygiene in the News Hour. They call access to water a fundamental children's right. In the event of payment areas, drinking water companies can cut off access to water. That is impossible in many European countries, but the Netherlands has been ignoring a call from the European Parliament for years. Drinking water companies do not simply cut households off from water. Only when the consumers fail to pay their bill after reminders, a home visit, and offering debt relief will the supply of water stop. Households may not be closed off if they can demonstrate with a note that this leads to health risks. The Dutch government does not consider children to be vulnerable, while children's rights organizations believe that they are. Children need water, not only for hygiene and food. Children need water to be able to participate socially, says Children Ombudsman Margaret Calverboer. 1.73 euros per 1,000 liters is what a payment is for water companies at a collection cost. The increasing debt by several hundred euros, about 1% of households in the Netherlands have great difficulty paying their water bills. For 1,000 liters of water, you pay about 73 euros at the cheapest drinking water company. According to the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, payment for the supply of drinking water is of great importance. The alternatives that are put forward, such as designating children as vulnerable consumers or setting up drinking water fund, are often so drastic that the financial sustainability of the drinking water supply is no longer guaranteed. Abroad, anyone who is now cut off from water will receive a bag or jerry can with 3 liters of water supply per person. An average person in the Netherlands uses 130 liters of water per day. According to the World Health Organization, people need at least 50 to 100 liters of water per day to prevent health problems. On behalf of the United Nations, Pedro Araujo Agudo and Special Rapporteur on water and hygiene. He's mainly concerned with clean drinking water in developing countries. He also feels compelled to hold countries accountable for this discontinuation policy. From the first day I took office at the UN, I have insisted that water cuts be avoided for all families living in poverty, he says. In 2015, the European Parliament already called on member states to prevent water closures. When the disconnection policy was drawn up, the Ombudsman for Children stated that families should not be cut off from access to water, in vain, because the regulation of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management was introduced in 2018, and families were allowed to be closed. That's my story.
Did that say 50 liters of water a day?
50 to 100.
I'm sorry. This is a liter of water. If I drink this in one day, 2 of these. Maybe
I think it means all water usage.
Oh,
so
okay.
that would be taking a shower, washing your hands, drinking,
okay.
all that kind of stuff. Because obviously, if you don't keep up your hygiene, you can get diseases from not washing your hands or taking a shower and stuff like that.
Yeah, I maybe washing your hands and stuff. Yeah, for sure. Taking a shower, but probably not necessary every day. I don't think that's a big. Hey,
you said it. Not
next
me.
story. Whatever, man. Biden's semiconductor plan flexes the power of the federal government. In return for vast subsidies, this is from New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my eye is hurting me for some reason. In return for vast subsidies, the Biden administration is asking the chip industry to make promises about its workers and finances. Semiconductor manufacturers seeking a slice of the nearly $40 billion in new federal subsidies will need to ensure affordable child care for their workers, limit stock buybacks, and share certain excess profits with the government. The Biden administration will announce Tuesday. The new requirements represent an aggressive attempt by the federal government to bend the behavior of corporate America and accomplish its economic and national security objectives. As the Biden administration makes the nation's first foray in industrial policy in decades, officials are also using the opportunity to advance policies championed by liberals that seek to empower workers. While the moves made would advance some of the left behind portions of the president's agenda, they could also set a fraught precedent for attaching policy strings to federal funding. Well, what's wrong with that? Last year, a bipartisan group of lawmakers passed the CHIPS Act, which devoted $52 billion to expand the U.S. semiconductor manufacturing and research in hopes of making the nation less reliant on foreign suppliers for critical chips that power computers, household appliances, cars, and more. The prospect of accessing those funds has already enticed domestic and foreign-owned chip makers to announce plans for or begin construction on new sites in new projects in Arizona, Texas, Ohio, New York, and other states. About only 3 in 10 U.S. manufacturers working are women. So shortly before the pandemic, the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington surveyed 35 states and found more than 11 million children had potentially need for child care, yet fewer than 8 million slots were available. The shortage is particularly acute in some of the areas where manufacturers are set to begin building new chip plants spurred by new legislation. Well, here's the thing: if you build a plant, you provide jobs, but you're not providing a lot of infrastructure. You're providing another problem for especially working couples. They both got to work. Kids got to go somewhere. Kids not old enough for school yet. Can't afford public or private school. Whatever. You gotta do something. You ain't got grandma around. It becomes complicated.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna make sure that companies are gonna get money for chips. They're not gonna go, hey, like they did with the PPP loans from the pandemic. They bought back their own stock and drove their stock price, which is what they did with the last tax cut. So this is what rich people do with their money. They don't spend it. Giving them more money doesn't help the economy. It never really does. They just take their money and do what they want to. That's my little tutorial on if you're trying to help people, don't give it to rich people. They're just going to keep it.
Yeah.
Find some way to give it to their other rich friends. So when you give them some kind of money to go build chips, you got to make sure they're actually investing it in the community as it was intended. In other words, this is government money. It comes with strings, believe it or not. And so kind of written by one of these clowns that writes like, oh, what are they doing? Putting strings in government money? Oh, yeah, that's what they do. Jeez. Anyway, here's your story.
All right. I mean, everyone wants the workers to be born, right? They want workers to make more babies so they have more workers, but they don't want those workers taken care of until they're 18 and they can work for them. Until you're 18, I don't care what you're doing, you can live in a box.
Yeah. But, and again, if you're trying to help poor people, it's socialism. If you're trying to help rich people, it's, well, you know, we have a lot of people that depend on us. What the hell are you talking about? That's socialism. You're telling us about the other people. Oh, you just be a greedy asshole like you really are. Just tell us the truth. You're greedy, you don't harm it, and you don't want to give it to anybody.
Yeah.
Say socialism. Say, I'm greedy. Hey, go ahead.
Speaking of companies with lots of money, commercial corona test companies made millions. What are they doing with that money now? As quickly as the industry appeared, it also disappeared. There are only 4 commercial providers of the corona test left. At the height of the corona crisis, there were a few hundred. The outbreak management team reports last week that the pandemic is over. Large-scale testing is therefore no longer necessary, is the advice. That seems to be the prelude to the final end of the testing industry. Commercial test streets sprouted throughout the Netherlands in 2020. The test for the hospitality industry, nightlife, for travel, or for companies that want to know whether their staff was contagious. But who were these test entrepreneurs? How profitable was their business? And what did they do when the question disappeared again? A tour of the NOS shows that all kinds of entrepreneurs threw themselves into the test sector. There were entrepreneurs from healthcare sector among them, a dentist, physiotherapists, a general practitioner, but also a travel agency and a web shop. Some started because they simply saw a gap in the market, others because their work was lost due to the crisis. While testing was a welcome life buoy for many people, it was a source of sparkling profits for other entrepreneurs. Annual reports that they filled with the Chamber of Commerce shows that their companies were running better than in the years before the corona pandemic. An employment agency that started selling PCR tests in Amersfoort built up around 700k euros in accumulated profits in 2 years. A travel agency from Amsterdam that has also offered tests increased its business asset tenfold, from 10,000 euros to 100,000 euros in the years when there was hardly any travel. An even bigger blow was made by Lead Healthcare, a barn company that provided personal advice to healthcare institutions before the pandemic. In February 2020, a subsidiary was added for services during the corona pandemic. In 2021, Lead Healthcare grew into a giant in the test country. The company became the main supplier for Field Lab and took care of tests for their Eurovision Song Contest in Rotterdam. From June to that year, testing for access was also added. From the spring of last year, the demand for tests started to decrease. Monique von Blokland noticed. Testing for entry stopped in March. Fewer and fewer countries demanded a negative test result. Then I completely switched back to organizing events, says Van Blokland. It's super nice. This is what I prefer to do. At Lead Healthcare too, testing activities have receded into the background. In addition to old activities, the company has focused on meditating for self-employed persons in healthcare sector and has started developing its own software. The remaining test providers focus on travelers. There are still a few countries left that still require negative test results, like China.
Right on. Well, I guess somebody's been keeping the money and not using it. Or
Yeah.
they're just, yeah.
Or invested it in more things for the business to do after Corona?
In weather news, winds shred southern plains, California to get more snow. Yeah, it's still winter here. Parts of the southern plains counted the injured and surveyed the damage Monday after tornadoes and other powerful winds swept through, killing at least one person in Oklahoma. While some Michigan residents faced a fifth consecutive day without power following last week's ice storm. In California, another National Weather Service said winter storms will continue moving into the state through Wednesday after residents got a brief break from severe weather on Sunday. Parts of the Northeast that have seen little snow this winter were under a winter storm warning. The forecasters warned of continued high winds in parts of plains and thunderstorms, possible tornadoes in the Ohio Valley. A storm system produced at least 4 tornadoes as it moved across central and northern Illinois on Monday, including 2 that formed in the suburbs of West Chicago, authorities said. Initial reports suggested damage. This report said damage there was limited to fallen trees or shingles torn. Probably didn't even touch down that long. At least one person was killed and 3 others injured after a tornado touched down Sunday night. Far western Oklahoma near the town of Cheyenne, where 20 homes were damaged and 4 others destroyed. I don't remember where Cheyenne is. It's probably west of Tulsa or something. Oh, it's west. Yeah, it's west. It's way out there by Panhandle. Got it. I had my directions confused. Blizzard conditions continue. Blizzard's warnings went into effect Sunday in Sierra Nevada. An avalanche warning was issued for backcountry around Lake Tahoe, where up to 6 feet of snow were expected over the next 2 days. In the upper elevations of G-force wind. Man, they're going to have some great skiing, I'll tell you that much. In 6 feet of snow, you're going to have an avalanche. In this series of storms arrive, especially that snow is going to melt really fast. So it causes that melting snow. We're digging for, it doesn't only cause. A 90-mile stretch of US 395 in California Eastern Severa was shut down Monday due to whiteout conditions, state transportation officials said. Los Angeles County declared a cold weather alert for valley and mountain areas north of LA. East Los Angeles, roads to San Bernardino mountain resort communities around Big Bend were closed after snow began falling again. In my Eagle cam, I look at my Eagle at Big Bear Mountain. He's buried, whoever's sitting on Nest at the time is constantly getting buried in snow. They just stay in the snow. Pretty cool. So that's basically the weather report. We're going to have some more fun weather in some fun parts of the United States today. Back to you.
All right. Treating migrant workers badly will become a criminal offense. Labor migrants are often in a vulnerable position in the Netherlands, but anyone who opposes this, for example, by paying them little or housing them poorly, can be dealt with hardly under criminal law. That is the thorn in the side of the cabinet, and is therefore today presenting a bill to make exploitation a criminal offense. The bill introduces the term serious disadvantage of employees. That amounts to exploitation. Where at most the labor inspector is currently often used, the government wants someone to be criminally convicted from now on if they seriously disadvantage their employee. Employers who hire people through an employment agency must also ensure that the people who work for them are not being exploited by this law. So, they have to check whether these employers get a good place to sleep. Otherwise, they are also punishable. Eric van der Burg, State Secretary for Justice and Security, has said, "You sometimes see that people are brought from abroad, and then they have to sleep in a barn with 50 other people." And he knows more examples. People who are severely underpaid or have to hand in their passports. All examples of things that are not possible, but which are difficult to deal with lately. And we say are unacceptable. This kind of abuse is of course not allowed under current rules, but according to the cabinet is because it is better to act against it if it is made explicitly punishable. Until now, it has always been tackled through labor inspection and labor law. But we say no, this exploitation of people in a weak position must be stopped and included in articles that deal with human trafficking, says State Secretary Vanderberg. The bill will go on into consultation today. This means that citizens and organizations are allowed to comment on it before it goes to the House of Representatives. The government may choose to amend the proposal after comment.
Next story.
Yeah.
In sports, two of the worst owners in the NFL are in the news. I just looked it up the other day. They are rated the two worst owners in the NFL. The first one is Daniel Snyder, who owns the Washington Commanders, and the second one is Jimmy Haslam, owns the Cleveland Browns. The guy who gave the $250 million guaranteed contract to a man who's been accused credibly of sexual harassment over 20 times. Gave him a biggest guaranteed contract in the history of sports, and he's basically one stupid thing away from jail. And it's guaranteed. 250 guaranteed for a mid-level quarterback who can't keep it in his pants. That's what this owner did. Well, now this guy, Jimmy Haslam, is now a 25% owner of my Milwaukee Bucks. What a douchebag. Okay, so this complicates the sale of the Washington Commanders because the Washington Commanders owner, one of the worst owners, and probably the worst owner in professional sports. Oh yeah, Jimmy Haslam was also convicted of, he owns the Flying J truck stops, convicted of a federal crime because they were keeping the rebates they were supposed to be giving to truckers. Yeah, so he's a scumbag. Dan Snyder is the owner of Washington. He's a scumbag. Jeff Bezos is trying to buy the team. Jeff Bezos, owner of Amazon, owner of the Washington Post. Everything Amazon owns, right? And the Washington Post wants to buy the Washington football team. You want to get, favorable coverage for your team, you buy the paper. You own the paper, you own the team. Hey, access. Anyway, that necessarily is not a conflict of interest because reporters are independent. And I don't think Bezos meddles. I don't think he's like Rupert Murdoch where he gets in everybody's business. Well, nobody's like Rupert Murdoch. He's scum. But Rupert Murdoch, Dan Snyder's holding out for a $7.37 million figure. The best bid he's gotten is $6.3 billion for the team. And this is complicated by the fact that the Milwaukee Bucks are one of the smallest markets in the NBA. And Haslam just spent what equates to 1/4 of $3.5 billion. That makes the Bucks the second most valuable franchise in the NBA at $3.5 billion. Now, if an NBA franchise, which doesn't have the TV deal the NFL has, which doesn't have the profit sharing the NFL has, if an NBA franchise in a small market is worth $3.5 billion, imagine what an NFL owner now thinks his team is worth with that TV contract and that guaranteed money and basically a stadium that's already in place. So that $7 billion is going to go up because he thinks, well, back in the day when they were the Redskins, they were one of the highest grossing teams in the league. They had a big fan base, nation's capital, worldwide. All the politicians who came to D.C. would go home and become Redskin fans because they were never football fans before. That is completely gone now. This team is such bad will now. They had to tear out seats. They had to tear out seats at the stadium and still say they were selling out the stadium. Not selling more seats, eliminating seats. Yeah. So that's where that's up in the air, and that's what's going on in the sports world, the big story. Anyways, according to me. Good.
All right. In the media world, a Van Gogh portrait has been sold for $1 million.
Is it Van Gogh?
Van Gogh.
Oh, there you go.
I said Van Gogh because we're speaking English, and that's how everyone says it. So, Well,
recently they started
Americans.
saying
That's how
Van
Americans
Gogh.
say it. So I'm going to say that so that people don't know who the hell I'm talking about. Instead of me just
That's okay,
spewing
we can
phlegm
have
into my
banter.
microphone.
We're
know?
bantering. We're
Yeah.
bantering. I'm just saying Van Gogh is how Americans have been told to say it now. Just like we were been told to say Kiev instead of Kiev. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, Kiev is how they say it, right? Van Gogh, portrait of potato eater seen, up for auction, bids for £1 million. The potato eaters is one of the figures depicted. Seen. She was portrayed so often by Vincent van Gogh that it was whispered in Noonen that the painter had made her pregnant. Today, a portrait of Gordina, or Seen de Groot, is being auctioned by Safe House in Christie's. The oil painting head of a woman is one of the dozens of heads of peasants that Van Gogh painted in Noonen when his parents lived there in 1884 and 1885. The series of studies eventually resulted in the famous work The Potato Eaters of 1885. Of all the studies of Noonen farmers, only the names of Seen de Groot is known. Van Gogh painted Seen in at least 20 times, which led to the gossip in Noonen. He wrote in a letter to his brother Theo. In September 1885, he complained that the past 2 weeks I have been very much troubled by reverend pastors. They warned him not to deal too familiar with people below my station, Van Gogh wrote. But that was not all. A girl, Seen, whom he had often painted, had a child whom they said in Noonen was his. The painter denied this and said she had heard from herself that the real father was a member of the Noonen parsonage. An Eindhoven artist had DNA research done in 2021 to determine whether Van Gogh was telling the truth. To this end, DNA material from two of Seen de Groot's great-grandchildren was compared with that of Leeuw van Gogh, the son and filmmaker of the columnist Theo van Gogh. But that's so separated, right?
Yeah.
That's not even the direct line. It's his brother who already has a different genetic formation than him.
Well, I think they're
Right?
looking for one Y marker specific. I think.
Yeah, maybe. Who was murdered in 2004? Very famously, Theo van Gogh was murdered in 2004. He is a second cousin of the painter. The investigation showed that Vincent could not be the father.
Oh boy, well there you go. Vincent was just keeping to himself, I think.
This
He liked to
painting, Head of the Woman, is one of the most expensive Van Gogh paintings ever, bitching between 1.1 to 2.3 million euros or 1 to 2 million pounds. According to an art historian and Van Gogh expert, this estimate indicates that the artist's Dutch work is a lot less profitable than the works he made in South France at the end of his life. Last year, a watercolor he made in the cities of Aries sold for more than 31 million euros. The highest sum ever paid for Van Gogh went to an oil painting, Portrait de Gaget. It was auctioned in 1990 for the equivalent of 71.5 million euros.
Sweet. This day in history, February 28th, 1986. The Prime Minister of Sweden is assassinated. Olof Palme. Strong pacifist beliefs included the opposition to the Vietnam War, was assassinated in Stockholm on 1986. Birthdays today: economist Paul Krugman, 1953. Bugsy Siegel, 1906. And those are not too many famous people born today.
There's a bunch of us normies.
If I haven't heard of them, I don't know if I want to pronounce their names. Pope Benedict became the first pope to resign since 1415 in this date, and 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, Pope Benedict resigned. Persian Gulf War was brought to an end by Saddam Hussein's acceptance of the ceasefire agreement, gave back Kuwait. That was in 1991 in the 90-day war. Final Opus Unwashed was aired in 1983, watched by 106 million viewers, the biggest audience in primetime television history.
Yeah, for a finale.
And in 1942, the Japanese landed on the island of Java and occupied it for the next 3 years.
No, Java.
Yeah. What's Dean Smith's birthday, if you know he was a basketball coach?
Nope.
North Carolina. And that's it. That's all. Not a whole lot of
All
crap
right.
happened today. We could do February 29th. There isn't one this year. I can tell you what happened tomorrow.
Yeah, sure. We should do that because there isn't one this year. No leap year.
Voting begun on Bosnian independence. Famous people. Giacchino Rossini, Italian composer, is born on this day. Famous birthdays. Here we go. Nobody I've ever heard of is born on this day. I don't want to disrespect people by saying I'd never heard of them. And I can't pronounce most of the names. So, Return of the King was released 2004 and on February 29th.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Gordie Howe becomes the first hockey player to score 800 goals in the NHL, or in the NFL. That would really be something.
Yes.
What's he doing with a hockey stick, man? Whoa. For a touchdown. All right, that's it. I gotta get out of here, man.
All right, this has been Allison with Before Coffee from the Netherlands, remarking on how much money people in the Netherlands make from taxes and selling paintings and, of course, selling COVID tests. Hope to see you tomorrow for another exhilarating read of what we think is the important news of the day.
Don't forget to be safe out there while we hunt for a slogan to say goodbye to. We're in development.
Goodbye.
Be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notify buttons, and follow our other channels, Toxic Alley, History of Gravy, and Scratchy Old Records.